Hello world, I'm Chris Myceny, aka Mr. FLIXTER, and I'm here to talk motion pictures. Mr. FLIXTER! In anticipation for the new film, I'm going to be reviewing all the films in the franchise up until I'll be able to see it. In the meantime, on with the show! Now, for this episode, I'm going to follow up with the last one. So, if you haven't seen my spoiler review of Scream, I recommend watching that video before this one. Because for this video, I'm going to talk about Scream 2. This is a spoiler review. So you've been warned. You. Yes, you. In Scream 2, Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson team up again for more metamania. But not only that, they expand on their idea of satirizing horror cliches by taking it a step further to talk about horror sequels. Picking up 2 years after the original film, it starts off with Jada Pinkett Smith and Omar Epps at opening night of a film called Stab, which is based on the book The Woodsboro Murders by Gail Weathers, which she wrote based on the events of the previous film. She plays a character named Maureen Evans, and he plays a character named Phil Stevens. But Maureen isn't really a fan of horror movies. She outright states that she hates them. She starts listing off the reasons why. Her main reason is because horror movies, especially slashers, tend to be predominantly white. It's actually a pretty funny scene because she's sitting there in the theater and she's just shouting at it, saying all her different problems. Phil, on the other hand, loves horror movies. He can't get enough of them. He doesn't see what her problem is. I love how Kevin Williamson immediately points out the flaws of horror movies from a non-horror fan. I also like how the film subverts expectations by pointing out how everybody in the movie is white, but casting well-known black actors in those roles. Now, this is when the opening scene gets problematic for me. When Phil goes to the restroom, he gets ambushed by a copycat Ghostface killer. My biggest issue with the whole setup of this scene is, like, how long was Ghostface waiting in the bathroom? And how did Ghostface know to wait in that exact stall? And even when he stabs through the stall, how would he know exactly where to go? What if he missed? Like, there's a lot of ways this could have fell apart very quickly. Phil hears something, which is very hard to hear, and I'm not even sure how he heard it. But anyways, he puts his head right up against the stall, and he listens, and then he gets stabbed right in the head. But, yeah, just the mechanics of it always kind of bothered me. If this bothered you too, make sure to leave comments down below. After Ghostface kills him, he proceeds to take a seat next to Maureen inside the theater. So they're watching the movie, and then there's a point where she gets real close to him, and then she notices on her hands there's blood from his jacket. But before she can even say anything, next thing she knows, she's being stabbed multiple times too, as she makes her way up to the front of the theater, and she just screams bloody murder. But all the spectators don't even realize that it's real. Later on, one of the cops points out that everyone just thought it was part of the show. This scene does a really good job of showing how the desensitization of violence can occur through its glorification in cinema. Just take time to think about that for a minute. We're watching us, the horror fans, watching horror movies during this world premiere, which Wes Craven does a really good job of capturing that energy of premiere night. If you've gone, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's just like a sporting event. People are cheering and standing up and applauding. Oh, it's great. And Wes Craven did a good job of showing what those nights can be like for people who might not be so familiar. But anyways, I digress. It shows how we're just so used to seeing horror movies and all the violence in it that we just think nothing of it. We know what we're walking into, and we know it's all fake, and therefore we just think it's okay. We know that we're in a safe place. Just think about all the horror movies that you've watched in your lifetime. So if you were in the same situation, the scary thing is, you would probably think the same thing. And another thing. Even though I don't really like Phil's kill, I really like how this scene plays out. Mostly because Jada Pinkett Smith's performance. She plays one of those no-nonsense girls with attitude. She knows what she wants, and how to get it. The way she portrays her death scene really captures that fear of not knowing what to do in an extreme situation. It's kind of heartbreaking the way she's reaching out desperately for help. They think nothing of it. That's what I mean. This works on so many levels. Neve Campbell is back as Sydney Prescott. She's in college now as a drama major. Which, I gotta say, it's nice to have a change in the setting, because it helps things feel fresh. She has a great story arc. She knows that she's a survivor. It's a very endearing, moving performance. Also, it adds dimensions to her that most final girls lack in slashers. She shows how hard it is to pick up the pieces and try to move on after you've experienced such tragedy. I'm really glad she wasn't recast. This film would just fall apart if Neve Campbell didn't return. Jamie Kennedy also returns as Randy. Naturally, he becomes enrolled in filmmaking classes, which makes perfect sense for his character, considering he worked in the video store before and he pretty much represents the horror freak in all of us. We get a little sneak peek into one of his class discussions that just happens to be about, you guessed it, horror movie sequels. And then they bring up the debate about whether or not all sequels are, by definition, inferior films. This is when we also meet Mickey, played by Timothy Olyphant. Trust me, we'll get to Mickey later. And he actually defends sequels, pointing out how some are actually better than their predecessors. Now, by doing this, Williamson gets the audience to consider their own personal thoughts and feelings about sequels. That's pretty clever, right? When they hear about the murders of Phil and Maureen, they have an interesting discussion about life imitating art, imitating life. That's another innovative writing choice by Kevin Williamson. Again, it gets you thinking about how what you're watching is reflected by other stuff that you've watched based on true events or something that's really happened. For example, it's well known that serial killer Ed Gein has inspired the likes of Norman Bates and Leatherface. Sarah Michelle Gellar joins the cast as Cece Cooper. She shows up in Randy's class before getting one of those infamous phone calls. I don't know about you, but the phone calls are what I look forward to most when it comes to these films. So, she's all alone in her sorority house, Omega Beta Zeta. She gets the first phone call from Ghostface. Roger Jackson returns as the Ghostface killer. And again, he does a phenomenal job. After that first film, he is the Ghostface killer. Wes Craven does a good job of keeping you lured into the conversation, while at the same time, keeping your eyes focused in the background to see if you can see Ghostface lurking around. What makes it especially creepy is when you get a sense of the vastness of this house that she's all alone in. So that means Ghostface could be anywhere. On the subject of phone calls, Randy's phone call is the best when he asks the Ghostface killer what his favorite scary movie is. And then the Ghostface killer asks him, and he lists off a bunch of stuff that obviously isn't horror movies. They just keep antagonizing each other. What Wes Craven manages to do here is create one of the scariest scenes in the film but it's during broad daylight in a very public, crowded place. Now that is movie magic. For this scene, Wes Craven insinuates fear by keeping the conversation heated. Not only that, he also makes it a race against time, because while Randy's on the phone, the rest of the group is trying to figure out who's on the other end of the line. But it's such an open area that it makes it a pretty desperate situation. The others are looking around, seeing if there's anybody suspicious looking using their cell phone. Meanwhile, Randy has had it with all of this serial killer stuff going on, and he lets Ghostface know how fed up he really is, until he meets his unfortunate demise. I love how they had the guts to kill off such a beloved, important character to the franchise. By doing so, they keep that idea going that no one is truly safe in these films, with the exception, of course, of Dewey from Part 1. Trust me, we'll get to Dewey. Courtney Cox returns as Gail Weathers. She has that same cutthroat attitude, but has a really good story arc about personal growth. She realizes things are more important than writing another book and it being a bestseller. Kind of touching because it's after when Randy dies when she discovers what's really important about what's happening at Windsor College. She has a really good performance showing her tough as nails side, but she also has a softer side in this film that we didn't see in the first one, because this film involves a love story between her and Dewey. David Arquette returns as Dewey. He's left with a resentment against Gail because of the fabrications she said against him in his book. He's not too happy about it. It's sort of made him a laughingstock at the local police station and around the town of Woodsboro. So when he comes back, he's actually there to help Sydney and Randy. But the two of them have great chemistry because, like I said, they have this love story side plot that doesn't feel forced. You see the two people grow and mature together, and you see how they get brought closer because of what's going on. And I gotta say, it is really fun to see these two bicker and then see them make up and go back and forth. It makes it seem more realistic that way. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, especially in a Wes Craven film. And while I'm on the subject of them, the scene in the sound booth in the audio-visual department is another highlight for this film. I like how they show the investigative side of trying to figure out who the killer is, because it was the two of them that discover the copycat killer is actually filming all the murders that have transpired, and they soon realize they're being filmed too. Wes Craven does a really good job of using the audio-visual department and seeing the labyrinth that it actually is to his advantage. Effective jump scares are used to show Ghostface lurking around different corners as Gail desperately finds a way to safety. Unfortunately, when she does find safety in a soundproof booth, she leaves Dewey helpless to the Ghostface killer. Now, this scene is problematic for me because this is the second time where Dewey gets stabbed, but it's not fatally, because it really goes against that idea of no one is safe. So if you're going to kill off a character, just kill him off already. That's why I really appreciate how they never try to bring Randy back, like say he survived the stabbing or anything like that. He does come back eventually, but I'll get to that in the next video when I talk about Scream 3. Lee Schreiber also returns as Cotton Weary. He's got a much more substantial role in this film than he did in the last film. Because in the last one, the only time we really get to see him is little clips that they show on the news. Like, you don't actually see him in person, or him and Sydney are never face to face. They don't share any scenes. But they do in this film. It's really interesting to see the conflict between the two of them, because, as it turns out, Cotton was actually innocent. So it's interesting because both of them need to learn forgiveness. They also need to learn how to move on with their lives. They're not so different. Schreiber also does a good job of showing how frustrating it is when dealing with the difficulties of trying to clear his name and make amends. He is exceptional in the role. He really steals every scene that he's in. Especially that discussion in the library that he's having with Sydney. Jerry O'Connell also joins the cast as Derek, Sydney's new boyfriend. And honestly, I keep forgetting that he's even in this film. He displays such a one-dimensional character, and he's not really in it all that much. And even when he is, his character doesn't really take part in the plot, like at all, aside from them trying to pin the crimes on him. But even that feels really forced. Trust me, I'll get to the finale. Elise Neil plays Hallie. She's Sydney's roommate and best friend. Again, she's a character that doesn't really have a lot of character development due to her limited screen time. It's like she's just sort of there just so they can have a higher body count for this film. But hey, it happens in slashers. Now, the scene after the car crash, when the cops are killed, absolutely infuriates me. And here's why. Like, why not just stab Ghostface while he's unconscious and then unmask him right there to find out who it is, instead of all this silly trying to sneak over him quietly stuff that they try to do. And then they go back. Why? Why does Ghostface inexplicably teleport? Now, granted, there are two killers at play here. However, shortly after that sound booth scene, they show Mrs. Loomis on a payphone when Sydney comes outside after Dewey gets stabbed. So if you think about it, she was the one there, and she's the one that did that to him. Which means Mickey would have been in the car. Which means him coming out of the car and then coming around the building and then sneaking up on Haley to kill her is impossible. He teleported from one place to another place. It makes no sense. Laurie Metcalf joins the cast as Debbie Salt, aka Mrs. Loomis, which we find out in the end, in the big reveal. But I'm getting to that very soon, I promise. In the meantime, she disguises herself as a reporter. She's always looming around in the background to constantly remind you that she's in the picture. Looming around? Get it? This brings us to the finale, which, honestly, I found underwhelming for various reasons. For starters, the character of Mickey disappears roughly halfway through the film, and then we don't see him again until this scene. So you kind of forget that he's in the movie after a while, and then when he takes the mask off, it's like, oh yeah, that guy. Aside from that though, the whole premise of the two of them finding each other online might not be so far-fetched. However, the idea of him finding the exact same school and attending the same exact classes of Randy is a bit of a stretch if you ask me. Mickey's motive doesn't really make any sense. So the whole premise of him finding these Woodsboro survivors and then getting into their group of friends is something else that bothers me too. The whole thing is, Mickey doesn't really have much character development, which makes him pretty one-dimensional. And there's no real explanation as to why or how he came to be in this group of friends with Sydney and the Woodsboro survivors. It just doesn't seem like he's all that big a part of their lives. So there's just way too many implications that would have to be involved, that would all have to work very conveniently in order for him to be involved in their lives at all. And this brings us back to Laurie Metcalf, who's revealed as Mrs. Loomis, the second Ghostface killer. And while it's a nice nod to the original Friday the 13th, with Mrs. Voorhees being the original killer, avenging her son Jason. However, it lacks that same emotional weight because of how convoluted everything actually is in order for things to take place the way that they do. It's just the whole idea of her having the plastic surgery and the liposuction and the manicure and following Gail around because she mentioned she's seen her on tour before in different cities is really far-fetched. So, I wrote a review on Facebook and I gave it a B+ on there. This wraps up my spoiler review for Scream 2. Stay tuned to my channel, and I'll review the other Scream movies in anticipation of Scream 5. I hear theaters should be opening soon, so that's pretty exciting. Hopefully, I get to watch it soon. Please keep in mind, this is only my opinion. It's okay to disagree with me, and it's okay to agree to disagree. Just have some class about it. I'm Chris Mytony. You can call me Mr. FLIXTER. And I just love talking motion pictures. Until next time, have a great day. Mr. FLIXTER. And remember, if you're a cinemaniac like me, make sure you like and subscribe down below.